people who think that RevOps is some kind of grand decision-making function, they're wrong. It's a service org. It's an internal service organization. And as part of that, your customers are the executives. They're the leaders inside of each of these parts of the go-to-market. They're the individual reps. So when you're thinking about compensation plans, you got to be rooting for the rep, right? Because you want them to be super excited about that comp plan. Otherwise, they're not going to get excited about their job. And the same thing goes for all the other parts of the organization. We want metrics that people can hit. We really want to make sure that we're stretching and we're pushing hard for that. And being in RevOps where you're kind of decoupled from the very stark realities of being put on a PIP, for example, that allows you to kind of bring some empathy into the process, build in some safety nets for the individuals who are trusting you, right, and embarking on this journey and this phase of growth in that company. And you kind of have to have that trust back in them that they're going to go bust their butts and do the best to make the most out of that comp plan.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Denowell
and Amy Weaver. We're really excited to have you on. You were introduced to us through Michael Ewing, a fellow former HubSpotter. You guys were worked together there, I guess, back in the day, long time ago, e-commerce days.
Yes. Yeah. The years pile up.
Well, he thought you would be a great candidate for us to talk to. And I have to say, looking at your background, we would agree. Your career has kind of gone from sales enablement, acceleration, growing teams, and now you're in a VP of revenue operations role, which is what we're here to talk about today. So thinking back on some of the previous roles that you've held, what would you say separated your teams that were scaling really efficiently from maybe sometimes that it was a little clunkier, more painful?
Yeah, I think the big piece when talking about scaling is to think about where in that journey from say $0 to $100 million you might be, because the tactics are going to be different based on where you're at in the curve. If you're going from 0 to 5 million, 0 to 10 million, something like that, you can afford to be very scrappy. You can do a lot of stuff that doesn't scale, quoting Paul Graham, do stuff that doesn't scale. And you don't have to have a real clear long-term strategy into how all of these systems work together. Once you get to some threshold, and it depends on the business, it depends on their sales cycle, you need to switch gears. And you have to start thinking about some of those scrappy tactics that maybe worked for the first few million. But now we need to think about how to do that at scale, but not like big scale here. We don't need the entire sales team to be plugged into, agentic AI and all of that stuff. We just need everybody to have stuff available in Salesforce. And we have to have a little bit of information on that call. And we need to do sequencing. When you get to the bigger scale, 50 million plus, you kind of understand what playbooks work. And you've started to really kind of tweak individual dials. The human part of that is interesting because as the employee count grows, the types of people who want to be in those businesses, specifically, let's talk about sales. Like, let's just isolate sales for a second. Those people who are going to take on that risk of an early stage startup, be that first 15 employees on the sales side, are going to be very different than someone who's going to come on at a 500 person company. So, yeah. And when I think about the teams that win at the executive level, as well as embedded culturally into the organization, everyone's very clear in understanding that for this period of the company, it's going to be Wild West. And we're going to add more rules, and we're going to have clawbacks, and we're going to have minimum deal terms. You're not going to get away with the stuff that you got away with before. And as an individual, if you want to grow with the company through those various stages, great. Just be aware that that's going to change in the future. It won't always be like this. The teams that are upfront and honest with their employees and bake it kind of into their culture and into the kind of rules of engagement, whether it's sales, marketing, or operations, those are the ones that come out on top. As an example, HubSpot did that really well. And when we were going through some of those challenges at 150 employees, 200 employees, 500 employees, 1,000 employees, everyone was very clear that, yes, this is changing. And this is how companies on the public stock market exchanges work. This is how companies that have raised a Series C work when you're competing against, people with stock tickers, right? you have to conduct yourself, and you're not going to necessarily have as much freedom as you may have before. But open and honesty from the top down, that was something that we did well at HubSpot and my prior companies. And I think that's the right way to go.
Really good. Yeah, which is, and I think as part of that, so it's again, so it starts with, another sort of theme that we've been hearing around, like, with that, the top down leadership sort of being very clear about the North Star, where are we going, but then also filling in the how, and the what, which is obviously critical, because knowing where we're going is one thing, but then sort of setting expectations about the changes that have to happen as we get from one one certain size, whether it's based on number of employees or revenue or a combination of the two. Things will change, and let's just enjoy the journey, kind of thing.
Yeah, enjoy the journey has been something in some way, shape, or form that's been part of the company values, and in every org I've really enjoyed working with. There's a bit more to it as well. I mean, we talked about leadership clarity, right, and in the vision that they set for the company. There's a cultural bit here too. There's cultural cohesion, if you will, and that has to be ingrained in everyone in the company. And that comes back to how you hire. It comes back to how teams deal with conflict, and how mid-level and frontline managers are dealing with challenges at the end of the month. Like, what do we do on the last 3 days of the month, and we're behind by 10%? Do we get together? Do we rally? Do we drag every last sales rep across the line and make sure we hit quota? Well, for the companies that have been the most successful, the answer is yes, absolutely. And it's really hard to drive that from the top down. The best way to help to foster that is, as a leader, don't isolate yourself from the kind of troubles that happen at the end of the quarter. Be there, be on the calls, be on the floor, right? Make sure that you're participating, and not in a, oh, let me know if you need any help. It's like, this deal is going to get us across the line. I'm going to join you. How can I be helpful? And being active and saying, I remember we talked about this in the pipeline review, and here's what it means to you. And I know you have this vacation coming up, and I know it's going to put you in accelerators, and it's going to put you way over quota. Like, understand that we're humans, right? And getting somebody as an individual across the line shows that the company is committed to that culture, and it just reverberates throughout the halls. Everyone's really figuring out, how do we pitch in. The engineers will be like, hey, can I jump on a technical call? Is there something I can do? Like, so that's kind of the second piece. I think making sure your resources are allocated well, and that you've got enough coverage to do the work is really important. If you end up short-staffed on any one part of the go-to-market puzzle, you're going to have troubles. You're not going to be able to support a culture if everyone's breaking apart. And then kind of after you've got that in place, then you can start thinking about technology and process. And I mentioned it starts with how you hire and how you bring in people into the organization. That's true, right? But at the end of the month, everyone being there helping each other out, it doesn't matter like how good your sales force is optimized. If you don't have leadership clarity and vision in contribution with that kind of cultural cohesion, you're going to have a hard time getting through, breaking through those barriers for that next stage of growth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We spoke with another guest who said when they are hiring, they don't look for a culture fit so much as they look for a culture add. And I wonder,
Yeah.
I wonder how you feel about that.
Yeah, structured interviewing helps a lot. Understanding what the key attributes are for individuals that are going to be successful in an organization. And we talked about growth here. Let's assume you're past the first hump. You're at 5, 10 million, you're at 100 some employees, whatever that might be. You're now trying to figure out how to replicate the successes that came from a little bit of luck, a lot of hard work and grit. So if we're trying to transition a business into something that's repeatable and growth, again, we got to be a little bit inorganic and kind of come up with some tricks to make the growth repeatable. But it's a lot more stable and predictable than it was in the early days. Hiring great talent is a major, major part of that. And using structured interviews where you've got a scoring system, and these are the attributes that our best employees have. The thing that I do a little bit differently is I'm not necessarily looking for how good are they at closing or any of those skills. I have a process. I have an onboarding. I have a sales structure. I have prospects that we're going to call. Is this individual going to be successful in this organization? That's the thing that I truly need to measure. I was brought in early at HubSpot with no formal sales experience. I was, a recent graduate and kind of a technical individual. And what they were looking at me for was to see, can this person learn the craft of sales? Well, I was eager to learn. I was, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I knew a lot about the space. So I had the criteria that, given the onboarding, the training, the coaching, and the management process at HubSpot, I was able to be a very good fit. Now it's up to me, right, to do the work and to be successful. But the organizations that scale the best spend time early. And usually it's a combination of RevOps and enablement. It's definitely a lot of involvement from leadership on the sales and marketing and customer success side to say, what are the attributes of a person who's going to come into this business? Not necessarily like, hey, can they sell, but are they going to be, to your point, a culture add?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. John, just if we can pause for a second there with you personally, and sort of that example you gave of when you joined HubSpot and you felt that the sort of experience of from the interview to onboarding and training was obviously really good. Was there something specific you think in your past? And you said you were straight out of college and whatever, but what do you think it was about you uniquely that you felt like it was a really good fit for you to sort of move into the sales space?
Yeah, you'd probably have to ask Mark Rivera. She might have that scribbled on a note somewhere. But whenever we took a bet on an individual who didn't come from a traditional sales background, we were looking for some really key aspects. I had a 5-point framework I used for building out the BDR team, and it started with, do they understand the role? Do they even really know what they're going to be doing on the job? And we would score it in kind of a green, yellow, red. Green means that based on their understanding and what we've ascertained in the interview, they're going to be successful with our structure, right? And they may be a great BDR or a great AE, but they may not be successful here. They may need a different environment. They may thrive in a very high management, close kind of micromanagement structure. We don't have the capacity to do that here. It's very much a raise your hand kind of environment, or rather it was at that point in time. We made a conscious decision to do that. So someone who would get a yellow, well, that means that they can still be successful. They just are going to need additional coaching, monitoring, and perhaps some additional effort to get them there. Red, just they're not going to be successful here. And we would look at 5 different aspects of, do they understand the role? Do they exhibit coachability? Coachability is huge when you're trying to learn a new product, break into a new space. It was a very evangelical sale back then. Do they have a desire for this role, like the sport of sales or the craft of sales? Do they have the energy? It's a big piece of trying to do this evangelical sale, especially when you're doing cold calling, even on inbound leads, right? They may have downloaded something somewhere, but they don't remember. And finally, can they follow a process? People who had a challenge with following process were the ones that, when they got on the rocks, they weren't able to get back off of it. They'd go on a PIP and they weren't successful. Those that exhibited strong traits in being able to follow a process, they would go a little bit off course. They'd maybe skip some steps in their qualification. Their pipeline would fall apart. Well, now we're in there as management, as individuals. We're all really focused on helping this individual. And it's not from you have to do all these activities or you're going to leave, but like, how are we going to make you successful? Let's look at your ratios, your ability to qualify, where your strengths are, and let's give you all the tools and augmentation around that, as well as all the coaching that you'll need, including support from other reps. Hey, let's team sell on this one here so that you can get back on track and get to your number. Now, follow the process until you've shown that you really know how to kind of master the sale. Then you can start going off the course a little bit. If you're hitting your number, I'm not going to bother you about that. There was actually a very not so public process that we had early on at HubSpot, which was the kind of internal experiments. If you had an idea, and this is where the e-commerce group came from, and you said, hey, I want to go work this particular type of business, or I think nonprofits are the way to go, or we want to break into Latin America. If you wanted to go down that path, you'd have to kind of do your day job, right? Show that you are able to be competent in kind of the standard sale, grow the business. And in your nights and weekends, whatever that might be, you would work on your project. You'd go find other people in the halls and kind of conscript them into the project and say, hey, we're going to go figure out how to crack into e-commerce. And you mentioned Michael Ewing. He was one of those people that I was able to, kind of grab in the hall and say, hey, we both really are excited about e-commerce and what this means for inbound marketing. And he actually authored a book around it. And that's how we built that. Took our nights and weekends and made it our kind of daytime job. That same kind of internal energy and innovation is what causes great businesses to differentiate themselves from good businesses and really separate from the pack. And that kind of X factor, that 10%, 20% time that they're investing above and beyond what their day job is what gives employees at these businesses such lasting credibility over time. They're able to go from company to company again and again and figure it out because to them, it's a puzzle to be solved.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily a job I have to do. They're
Right.
thinking about the constraints they have, and then they want to color outside the lines a little bit too.
Well, and to your point, it's the cultural fit. It's like they're looking for that type of environment, that's somewhere where they're going to thrive, and they want to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, rather than like be complacent, I guess.
Yeah, one of the questions I got asked was, do I need to worry about you leaving the company? I interviewed with Brian Halligan, and I go, you do, but it's only when I get bored. And they kept me very busy on a lot of different, very difficult tasks for many years. And it was one of my favorite working experiences, and it was very formative for my later companies that I'd founded to be able to go through that in kind of a safe environment where I still have the 9 to 5, but I could go and kind of learn some of those extra skills that would be needed to be an entrepreneur later in my career.
Yeah, John. So that's I think that really frames like where it all started for you. I'd love to hear from your perspective. Like, do you feel there's a clear through line from those early days of essentially being a sales hacker at HubSpot, and thanks to incredible mentorship from people like Mark Roberge, and of course you were probably, it was a smaller team back then, so you had direct communication and what have you with Halligan and all the other amazing people at HubSpot. But the through line looking back to where you are today is essentially being a revenue operations leader. What are the things that are still the same, and what are the things that you've added essentially to your repertoire because again the go-to-market model has evolved in the last 10 years, right? Since those days. How would you say that that's changed for you and evolved for you?
Yeah, I would say that for myself and for others like me that have gone this path of direct go-to-market, frontline to management, early stage, late stage, a bit of everything. The kind of equations are the same. We haven't invented drastically new types of businesses. We still charge money for software, or we turn a part into a finished part, right? There's inputs and outputs. Fortunately, the laws of physics haven't broken there. But how that transformation from input to value has changed is the kind of challenge. And I'd say there are two types of individuals, probably many more, but I'll simplify it, that look at how businesses grow and how businesses thrive. One is looking through the lens of, I have this machinery, whether it's humans, an engineering team, a SaaS product, and I'm going to figure out how stuff goes in and how stuff goes out. And I'm going to kind of try to maximize locally this particular system. And I think it's a very common way of thinking, especially in operations, that we kind of try to scope the problem in a way that we can demonstrate we have improved by 15%, and then the investors celebrate and everybody gives each other high fives. But there's another way of looking at how business is done, which is thinking more systemically about the creation of value in the context of the greater market that you're serving. If you're thinking about your customers and you're thinking about, I'll use an example from one of my other companies, Bedrock Data. We did data integration. We helped companies like HubSpot and Marketo and Salesforce and all these businesses connect their data together. So we weren't thinking about how do we maximize HubSpot's ability to integrate with, Sugar CRM. We're thinking about how integration itself works. How do marketers use data from other systems in their context? And whether a platform goes and adds new features or fields, or you buy a company and you add in data sources, that's all just noise and kind of details. The core challenge here is, how do we connect data to make it useful? So, what I see the challenges that businesses have today from an operations perspective, it's a lot of the same stuff that I heard back selling to marketers, effectively an SEO tool. And today, I would say the bigger challenges are, there's a lot more noise, there's a lot more software that you can just go buy off of the shelf, and being able to block that out and actually think about the problem as a business that you're solving, that's a bigger and bigger challenge. So the thread to your original question, from selling software, I'm asking questions to try to qualify a marketer as to whether or not they're going to be a good fit for our software. Well, today I'm thinking about, how does an operations team take a sales team and a marketing team and CS and all of this in conjunction with all of our customers, and be able to build something that's an efficient transformation of these inputs, challenges around telephony, around data integration, around marketing, whatever the product is, and turn that into some kind of solution, better connectedness with their customers, the ability to reach out on demand, be able to kind of transform how people are doing marketing. So I think that bumping up a level and thinking at that level of kind of how the market itself works, the problem you're solving, the customers that you have, that's the system. And it's much broader than I think a lot of people are thinking about it, an individual sale or an individual operations kind of optimization exercise.
Yeah, and it's so yeah, and again, you sort of started alluding to the other sort of common thread we've been hearing around how critical the alignment between marketing, sales, and CS is, and I think that's again so HubSpot was ahead of its time, I think, from a go-to-market perspective, even though as a now a sort of a CRM or customer platform SaaS company, they were still playing a lot of catch up with Salesforce on Dynamics and even Sugar, as you mentioned earlier, which is an interesting one. But ultimately, what it comes down to is and how the go to market works today, because you just if you don't have an aligned go to market strategy across marketing, sales, and service or CS, and you have that very clear handoff from each of them, ultimately the customer experience is going to suffer, and that's when things start to I like your analogy, because I also grew up on a coast where once you end up on the rocks, it's really hard to get off, and the way to avoid getting on the rocks is through alignment of your teams, your processes, your data, and of course finally your tech stack.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'd agree with that. I think there's an additional challenge too, more recently, in kind of the role of revenue operations in that leadership team. Why are people bringing more VP of RevOps roles into their organizations earlier? It's a big piece of that. It's having somebody who understands sales and marketing and CS, who's taken a tour of duty through those various roles and is able to act as that grand vizier, as a kind of relatively unbiased individual on that leadership team, to say, hey, folks, we're kind of missing an iceberg right in front of us, right? We're all very focused on the tactical. We all know the things that we want to do, but we're missing where we're going. Like, we haven't chose a compass direction. Let's pick that first, and then we can break it down further. And I'll help you, and I'll give you the technology, and I'll enable your teams, and I'll run the deal desk for you, so that you can go and execute on the things that you're supposed to do. I'll take all of the minutia and errata away, but first we have to decide where we're going.
Yeah, I really like the way you position that, and because again, it's one of our recent guests was saying how RevOps is essentially the superheroes sort of behind the scenes, that because they're enabling their marketing and sales and CS leaders, that the value that they see and find sort of operating below the waterline, as it were, is so invaluable but often overlooked. And I think this is why it's also harder for many businesses. So RevOps or revenue operations still, in a lot of industries is still somewhat of a unknown go to market or just a term per se, because it's just still a little murky as to how it fits into marketing, sales, and CS. And I think the sort of the repetitive message that we've been hearing in the last month or two has been, it's essentially an enablement function which is so critical for the business to scale. Coming back to what you were saying earlier about when you're at that point where you can start creating more predictable systems and processes to scale. Doing that today without, whether you call it RevOps or not, whether you have some sort of enablement function across marketing. And again, I think it's the cross-functional aspect of it. It has to support marketing, sales, and CS for it to be most valuable. But obviously, if you're any amount of that you're doing, of course, is going to help. But the more aligned it is, I guess the more successful the growth and scalability will be. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always a challenge to creating a shared resource. And when you're early on, especially in growth mode, as a leader, you're fighting for budget, right? You're working within a budget that nobody believes, and it's kind of contrived, and it's based on some ratios. It's going to change halfway through the year. You're learning so much as you grow, but you certainly don't want to give away any, headcount or resources if you don't have to. Not trying to say that you need to play politics here, but you got to be prudent to run your part of the business. As a sales leader, you're really thinking, do I have the stuff that I need to hit my goals? As a marketing leader, you're thinking the same thing. You're thinking the same thing if you run CS. And what that means in terms of staff, resources, tools, enablement, that's going to vary as that company grows. To be that shared resource means that you have to give up some of that autonomy. And the biggest challenge I'm seeing businesses when I talk to my friends who have a similar role is, having holdouts. Marketing or CS or sales, someone doesn't want to give up, the information. They think that they have to go and build their own little kingdom. I see this more from people who come from very large organizations. Uh, there's a few three-letter businesses that are out there that are very famous for buying multiple companies, pitting divisions against each other, and saying like one of you is going to walk out alive. And I think if you come from that culture, it leaves a mark, it leaves an imprint, and it's really hard to go back to trusting in somebody else and in that kind of centralized resource. Good CEOs, good leaders, and founders hire people who are able to establish that level of trust and realize that they can't do everything all the time. Otherwise, they're just going to be micromanaging their team. If they can't trust another executive to bring back the information and kind of look out, in front of the car for them, make sure there's nothing that they're going to hit, then they're going to have a really hard time putting trust in the process, putting trust in the vision of the company, putting trust in the board, right, to make intelligent decisions when it comes to market dynamics. So that can be really difficult for that leader because now they're in kind of this cognitive dissonance. They're somewhere in between being completely on board with the business, but also kind of holding some stuff on their own. And not to say that everybody needs to be friendly all the time, like you should be challenging ideas across the line. But to have RevOps in the mix allows those leaders to offload some of that potential defensiveness. And the way that I describe it internally, it's like, hey, I'm going to make sure that we've got a really nice, pristine boxing ring to get in there, so we can just take the gloves off and go at it. So we're not arguing about the data. We're not arguing about, oh, well, your numbers don't match my numbers. No, there are no other numbers. There's my numbers. There's RevOps numbers. And let's go argue over that and see, do we need to add resources to marketing, to sales, to CS? Oh, CS needs more people for support. I've got your numbers. I know what all your support metrics are. Yes, reply time is going up. And yes, we're getting a lower NPS because we're not able to get to these people fast enough. Yea, verily, I will say support needs help. Right? That's an example where you can take that data and help to advocate for those other individuals. People who think that RevOps is some kind of grand decision making function, they're wrong. It's a service org. It's an internal service organization, and as part of that, your customers are the executives. They're the leaders inside of each of these parts of the go-to-market. They're the individual reps.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So when you're
Your
thinking
internal
about
customers.
you're thinking about compensation plans, you got to be rooting for the rep, right? Because you want them to be super excited about that comp plan. Otherwise, they're not going to get excited about their job. And the same thing goes for all the other parts of the organization. We want metrics that people can hit. We really want to make sure that we're stretching and we're pushing hard for that. And being in RevOps, where you're kind of decoupled from the very stark realities of being put on a PIP, for example, that allows you to kind of bring some empathy into the process, build in some safety nets for the individuals who are trusting you, right, and embarking on this journey and this phase of growth in that company. And you kind of have to have that trust back in them that they're going to go bust their butts and do the best to make the most out of that comp plan. So yeah, RevOps I think has got people are discovering the place for that right now, and many businesses will start to delay that decision, saying, "Oh, we really don't have that inefficiency." It's not that. It's like we're not even having a conversation. We're talking past each other. At the most important time possible, when we're making growth decisions, we want to make sure that sales and marketing are really having a hard conversation about the topics that matter.
John, so this could be. I'd really love to get your perspective on. First, the first part of the question is: so when folks are reaching out to you for help, are they? I'm guessing they fall into one of two camps, and if it's just the one, then that makes it easier. But they either are very aware of the benefits of RevOps, or they're trying to find out more about how RevOps could help them improve their business. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I would say it's a spectrum. And I would say that everyone is aware, everyone is curious, but not fully convinced. I've never had anybody come to me and say, like, yep, I absolutely need RevOps off, and here's exactly why. And if I talk to somebody, even just advising earlier stage companies, they say, well, we need RevOps right now. And I was like, well, why? And they're like, well, yeah, I don't actually know. And so if somebody came to me and said, hey, I've got sales, I've got marketing, I've got CS, the team's done great so far, I've got phenomenal leaders, we need somebody to come in and just like help them operate. And if somebody came to me and said that, I would go, do you understand RevOps? Right? You absolutely get the operations part and the revenue part. It's all the things in the go-to-market matched with operations. I have yet to have somebody come to me and say that. But as I go through a series of questions with them, where are the challenges? Oh, we're not hitting this goal or that goal or that goal. Is it because people aren't working hard enough? No, that's never the case. Is it because the market's not there? No, we've grown to this point so far just fine. Have you tried a new technique? Well, we don't really know what to try yet. Okay, so now we're all arguing over what our next step is. We really don't have kind of some flat level ground to start this conversation from. I use words of conflict, but it's much, much more amenable than that. And as humans, we're really passionate. We're really excited about the things that we do. And if you're in one of these leadership roles, there's a lot of upside if you do great, especially as if you're in a growing company that has some equity position to it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to impress is that these conversations are necessary for the company to essentially make up its mind about what they're going to do. Because now those leaders need to go have a conversation with their reps and their managers and say, this is what we do. We do this, we don't do that, right? This is the Bedrock Data way, the Regal way, the HubSpot way, right? And it needs to be impressed upon everybody in the organization so that everyone all the way down can make the decisions that are going to further our company goal. If you don't believe in that, you're going to build these kind of clans and constituencies internal to the business, and you're rowing in different directions now. So if somebody were to come to me and say, I absolutely need RevOps, and I would ask them why, and then I might hear, well, I heard about it, or I think I need somebody to manage my CRM. I go, well, those are things, right? Those are things that fall under RevOps, but tell me more, like, why do you need a VP? Like, why do you need a leader here? And I'll hear answers like, well, we have a good ops team, but they're hitting a wall, and we're hitting skill challenges, and we're trying to scale. And we're not coming up with the same answer anymore. We used to be able to just sit in a room together and kind of hammer it out over a pizza and some beer. Well, it's not working anymore. Like we have big teams and meetings and layers and hierarchies. How do I get this whole ship aligned, and what should we be using to make that decision? Right? It's not any kind of counseling, right? It's like just setting it up so that we can have an honest conversation. And that means going through the data. That means making sure that we're having one-on-ones with the field, understanding how are they being enabled, onboarded, continuous education, all that's part of it. And making sure that our transactions are clean. Like if finance isn't happy, nobody's happy, right? And that means that making sure that our contracts are good and that everything's buttoned up and it all ties through. So it's an interesting world of various different tasks, but I'd say more than anything in any role that I've had in the past, it requires patience. A lot of excitement, a lot of optimism, but it requires patience. And it also requires the ability to push it a little bit. And that's why having an executive in that room that's at that peer level makes sure that you can break through those kind of growth barriers time and time again, because it's no longer, oh, well, you've got the RevOps person reporting to you, so I'm going to not believe their data. It's like, I'm agnostic. I report to the CFO or the CEO. Like I'm out of the game here. I don't have a horse in this race, but you do. And here are the things that you should consider when you're talking about resource allocation or budgeting or personnel or strategic.
Technology. We haven't really touched on it much yet, but the technology piece must
Oh
be
yeah.
a really big part of the decisions you're helping people make.
Yeah, technology is part of it. I think that the market itself, from a lot of go-to-market technology, is kind of reaching some singularity. Everybody's got some function that's kind of like something else. I'd say even maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there was more differentiation between various platforms, but it's more important than ever to come back to like, what do you need this thing to do?
Mm-hmm.
I speak with a lot of leaders that, companies that I coach, and I hear time and time again, well, we need blank. And I ask, well, why do you need that? It's like, well, we have all this data and we can't make sense of it. Well, that's not going to solve your problem. Like you have to think about what sense means to you. Hey, you have a bunch of usage data, you have customer information, you have support tickets. Let's just put that in front of a CSM. Can they do something with that? Will they do something with that? And that really kind of puts the brakes on technology buying decisions. Once you really understand what it is, then the purchasing is actually quite straightforward. Like, here's what we want our process to be. Here's how it's going to work. These are the things that we're going to do. We're willing to spend this kind of money for it. And here's the uplift that we're expecting to get. And then you go to all the potential vendors and say, what you got?
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned something briefly in your previous answer, John. That was you don't have a horse in the race, or whatever. I forget what the analogy was that you used. So when you're coming in as a VP of revenue operations, so you're reporting to the CEO or CFO typically?
Generally, yeah. You can do it a bunch of different ways. If you have an organization where you have an experienced chief revenue officer that is overseeing, a great majority of the revenue process, that can work as well. But you need enough visibility and to a lesser extent authority, because most of your influence is being done through conversations and relationships. But you kind of need to put your foot down at a certain point in time and be like, no, my data, not yours. If you don't have that backing, or people have, phantom, operations in different parts of the organization, then you end up in these conversations at the executive level where it's like, oh, well, my person brought their data. And it's like, wait, time, right? This is new evidence. This wasn't introduced to the court. Couldn't cross-examine it. And that is where things get tough. You need, and the CEO is not going to go in necessarily and say like, hey, wait, flag on the play. You brought in some outside data, like, and it comes out completely different. It doesn't fit with what we've all agreed upon. So you kind of need to root that out early, and the leadership has to kind of respect that I'm giving up like my inner circle of like separate data that I manage, and I'm going to kind of put trust into the shared resource. I can still have my analysts. I can still have my people thinking about how I'm going to attack a particular strategy or specific initiative. But if you come to the table to make big decisions around Are we going international? Like, what should we do with the sales team? Do we do an outside sales motion in addition to inside sales? That's big spend, and that's year-long commitment. You really need to make sure that everyone kind of agrees that we're going to use the same set of data, that we're going to use the same kind of chalkboard, one pane of glass, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So, John, can I put you on the spot a little bit? And that is, so as more and more companies are adding, a CRO to the C-suite, how do you anticipate? And I know it does change a little bit from industry to industry. I know you have a lot of SaaS experience. So again, it'll change. But where do you ultimately see the CRO sitting, and who are they reporting to?
Yeah, CRO is generally going to report to the CEO, and the CEO in the best run companies that I've been able to be part of or were visible to are very much acting as a partner to that CRO on behalf of the shareholders, on behalf of the board's needs. Now, you want to manage the board, right, and still focus on your own decisions and attack your market the way that you want to do it. But in those conversations, it's not going to be the the assistant manager of the North American junior sales team that's going to be getting grilled. It's the CRO, and understanding how all of the pieces work together at that kind of CRO level is critically important. I'll use an analogy on the technology side. Like, what makes a good CTO? Well, CTOs are part staff engineer, right? They're in the ivory tower thinking about very complex topics and the future of the data science itself. And on the other side, they're people managers. They're VP of engineering. So you usually have a CTO who kind of has a blend of both of those line management, operational capabilities, hiring, firing, recruiting, all of that, as well as the very difficult, hard art, if you will, of engineering. On the sales side, that CRO should have the same VP of sales capabilities, as well as that principal 3 sales rep kind of understanding and mentality of the customer. And by synthesizing those two, they can send their leaders off to do the execution, the implementation of how we're going to go to market, how we're going to change our requests to product, how we're going to think about partnerships, right? That's the stuff that CROs are generally thinking about. If you've got all that loaded into your head, you're probably not going to have a ton of time to make sure that you're not going to crash your boat. The analogy we've used a bunch of time on this call, into icebergs and floating stuff on the road. That's where you're going to see a VP of RevOps report up into a CRO, because they really are at the top of the food chain at that point in time of the whole revenue lifecycle in a lot of ways. They're going to have partners upstream and downstream for sure, but they're the one that's really on the spot. Let's say 15 million plus revenue in, say, like a SaaS business as an example. If you've got something where you're earlier on, you've got kind of a VP of sales that's about at the point where they have enough responsibility to kind of need that elevation and title, then you're going to see a VP of RevOps, revenue operations in general, be a peer in that group. But there's going to be a point in time where we need to lift that individual and that kind of lift that office up into a point where they're thinking strategically about the entire revenue organization. And whoever is doing that thinking, if it's the CEO earlier on or the CRO later on in the growth, that's where RevOps should really be connected
I
to.
really like that. And the reason I asked that is because one of the, I guess, the most common challenges we run into, and let's just, for simplicity's sake, companies between 100 and 1,000 employees, and we don't, we've worked with a lot of SaaS companies, but we work more with professional services businesses and other business models. And the challenge, I think, that we're seeing, and we're not quite sure where it's going yet, is the cross-functional nature of what it is that RevOps is, right? Because it's essentially, it goes back to Peter Drucker stuff from like 50 years ago, and like where you couldn't measure a lot of the stuff, whereas not today you can measure that stuff, which means that the CFO is now very much a part of the conversation. But again, to your point of like a CTO and a CFO, and they all have their day jobs that they're responsible for ultimately. So how do you solve for the cross-functional aspect and the cross-functional value to the entire business of RevOps? Or do you think that we're making RevOps seem more important than what it is?
Now, it's tough because the more parts of an organization that see the value in it, the more your job gets hard, right? The more responsibilities you're taking on. The When working with a new organization, I'm generally thinking about, what's the leadership's take on revenue operations? What's their opinion on it? They're either, no, I want my sales ops, my marketing ops, my customer ops, my finance ops. I want that all separate because I need my little thing to manage, and I just need somebody to kind of run my reports. In a view like that, you're gonna face some adversity. You're gonna face some challenge. And it may be that they need an analyst because you have a leader that just needs help with, dashboards and reports and stuff like that. That's fine. Like, we can assign somebody to that. But that person has to work off of what we agree is our core data. The first thing I always do is I ask, where are your core reports? And they're like, core reports? What are those? Like, your core reports. It shows me every single stage of the funnel. Like, absolutely audited through and through. Nobody's going to argue with that. And they're like, oh, we don't have that. I said, great. Step one, we build our core reports together. And we're going to go around the table and we're going to say, what's your report? And I'm going to go line these two things up and I'm going to say they don't match. So let's hammer it out, right? Do we agree that this is an MQL or an SQL or a stage one or whatever we want to call it? Let's at least get past that so we can go from end to end and see what's happening. What gets measured gets managed, right? And from there, we can go and argue about, the optics of if RevOps should be, elevated to that kind of, station and stature. I think that when you get multiple parts of the organization believing in the value, they see that, oh, wow, they can just very quickly output the information that I need. And it comes with an analysis, and it comes with an opinion, and it comes with market data. And this person's done it before. So that's way more valuable than trying to follow up on my hunch that I have that some of my reps aren't doing so well. So it needs to be carefully integrated across the organization. And there will be some parts that are always, held out. Like, hey, I need a marketing ops person that just focuses on, Marketo or HubSpot or whatever that is. And that's perfectly fine. What we want to make sure, though, is that person is, tying their data back to kind of what we agreed upon in those core reports. So is it overblown? I don't think so, because think of the alternative here. The alternative is disjoint operations groups, junior people in multiple parts of the organization, and to have somebody who's functional in the data day to day, to be able to also be able to be strategic and think about how to tie this stuff outside of their team. Well, their allegiance is within their vertical, right? If you're in sales ops, at the end of the day, it's your VP of sales that's kind of, banging their fist on the table for your raise. So how are you going to go and say, actually, we're not measuring this right. We should actually reduce our number a little bit. Our forecast is a little overblown. You're never going to do that. No reason to shoot yourself in the foot. And something like RevOps, we're trying to be honest with ourselves here. And it's not that it's any more noble. It's just the risks aren't there nearly as much as you would be if you're verticalized to a particular go-to-market function. You get out of the kind of extreme focus from whoever that functional leader is, that VP of sales, but you inherit a lot of new perspectives. So you have to be ready to take on that kind of conflict from group to group and be able to be very clear in communicating, be very professional in all of your interactions, and realize these are experienced leaders. So if you're going to be a contributor in RevOps, you got to make sure that you know your audience, and you have to be kind of a couple steps above what, say, somebody who is just specifically doing systems work in a sales ops role would be, because now you got to make sure that everyone's considered. Hey, we're going to make some changes in the CRM. It's going to have a bunch of stuff upstream and downstream. It's going to crash into finance systems. It's going to crash into marketing attribution. And you don't really necessarily have to take that to as much of an account if the only person you're loyal to or rather responsible to is the head of sales.
Wow, I have so many more questions, but I know we're out of time. So, John, before we wrap up, I hope we can have you back at some point, because I think there were probably two or three things that you said which we could have entire episodes around. But thanks
Sure.
for
Happy to
really
help.
teasing out some really good questions that I'm sure a lot of people are going to leave with here. But as we wrap up, if for anyone listening who's sort of considering taking the next step or making the next investment in RevOps, what would you suggest is the first step, or what are the two or three things that they should consider?
Yeah. First thing is pick up the phone. You know somebody in your network. You know somebody one or two steps away. If you find somebody in revenue operations that's put off from an intro call, you found somebody who's not really in RevOps, right? We understand it is a services role. We have seen, the worst behavior and the best behavior. Don't think that you're going to scare us away. Whether it's someone doing a fractional role in revenue operations or you're looking to hire somebody, pick up the phone and talk to them and bring them your problems. You're going to find that, like the good lawyers or tattoo artists, right? Good tattoos aren't cheap and cheap tattoos aren't good. Same thing with lawyers, right? Same thing with RevOps. But you're never going to have somebody turn you away to say, hey, I'm thinking about this. Help me understand this. So that's your first step. Reach out to people you have in your network. And two, I'd be real careful on social media these days. Take everything with a grain of salt, because kind of the definition of the work of RevOps can mean very different things based on kind of how people are trying to market it. So go talk to people who have done it. Talk to people who came from sales and marketing and support roles and cut over into revenue operations. Every RevOps person that I've hired, and I'm still keeping this trend, it'll break at some point, has come from sales, marketing, CS. They've come from the front lines before. And it's just something that's so unique and different to be able to empathize with your customers. That, to me, at least, in terms of the people that I hire for my teams, that's kind of rite of passage. So I think that while it may have some knock-on effects when this RevOps industry grows at scale, I think knowing someone who came from it and is somewhere in your network and is willing to talk, that's the first
awesome.
step
Really,
to get on
really
the path.
good advice. Well, John, thanks again so much, and we look forward to staying connected.